Okay, we're live now, just so you know.
Okay, I don't have a picture of me on. I have your Sunny Rosen here.
Is that okay, or do you want to be able to see yourself?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, cool. Well, we're looking good on our end, so all good.
So in a couple of minutes, we'll be going. I'll start the presentation and all good. I think we're ready to begin. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the launch of my new book, Natchitoches, Louisiana, 1803 to 1840, a Creole Community on the American Frontier. I want to thank LSU Press for publishing the book and for all their help in bringing this event about. I especially wanted to thank Sunny Rosen for the help with the technology since I am almost computer illiterate. Something about myself. I'm an anthropologist by training. I worked as state archaeologist for the state of Louisiana for 15 years, and then as a head of Department of Social Sciences at Northwestern State University in Natchitoches. When my husband and I first arrived in Natchitoches, we were enthralled with the town and the very unique and diverse history associated with it, and the tall tales that were being told about it. After I retired, I decided to look into the history of the area further and found out that the actual history of the area is more interesting than the tall tales. I hope you will agree. When writing the book, I let the people speak for themselves as much as possible. And we're very fortunate to have so many traveling accounts, journals, newspaper articles, official documents, and also a whole series of letters from this time period for Natchitoches. I would like to start by providing an overview of the book, and then I will discuss one particular area in more detail. The first chapter of the book deals with the people that the Americans found when they came to Natchitoches. These included the French, Spanish, African, and Indian or tribal people, and the difficulties that the American faced in incorporating all these diverse groups into first the territory of Orleans and then later the state of Louisiana. Chapter 1 also provides an overview of the geography of the area of Natchitoches. Chapter 2 considers the military, this dispute over the actual boundary of Louisiana Purchase, which nearly brought the Spain and the United States to the brink of war, and the life of the soldiers at Fort Claiborne, which was the fort at Natchitoches during the fort's existence. Chapter 3 delves into the United States government approach to the Indians and talks about two institutions that were in Natchitoches, governmental institutions in Natchitoches, the Indian Trading Post and the Indian Agency, and we'll come back to the agency. Chapter 5 describes the town during the first 20 years after the arrival of the Americans. Problems with the neutral ground, filibuster efforts to invade Spanish Texas, and the eventual removal of the fort, trading post, and agency from the town of Natchitoches. Chapter 5 considers the growth of the area, the development of Natchitoches as a regional center, the coming of steamboat traffic and transportation and what that meant for the area, and then the eventual changing of the course of the Red River. Originally had flowed right directly in front of the town of Natchitoches. And then about 1820, 1830, it began to change its route, and more of the water went down the channel to the east of Natchitoches. This more or less left Natchitoches without water, river access during certain times of the year. Although there are many stories and topics that can be covered in these chapters, I would like to concentrate on Chapter 3, particularly the portion of it having to do with the Indian Agency. Theodore Povey, who was a budding travel journalist, came through Natchitoches in 1829-30 and provided a recording or a record of what the Indians looked like. This is what he wrote. The Indians come here to trade. You see them coming down the hill, leading their fur-laden horses, carbine under the arm and bow over their shoulder. Around them dart the children. Next come the women, their tiny infants, nursing infants, sleeping peacefully in the folds of the coverlets slung over their shoulders. The Indians open haversacks, where they store silver rings that they hang from their nose and ears. Others paint their face red and black, bedecking themselves with brilliant embroidered headbands, armbands, bracelets decorated with porcupine, or sewn with parakeet heads, or the beaks of black woodpeckers. With tomahawk at the waist and bow in hand, they march proudly toward the village, making their cougar quivers rattle as the trail sweeps through the dust. This is a picture of a Coshawta man. He's dressed in trade goods that he would have gotten from either the trading house or from one of the local merchants. The first Indian agent of the area was Dr. John Sibley. Here is Sibley. Sibley had been born in Massachusetts in 1757. He studied medicine and served as a surgeon's mate during the Revolutionary War. After the war, he moved to Western Massachusetts and married. In 1784, he moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and then in 1802 to Louisiana. Sibley became acquainted with many of the leading men in the New Orleans and Natchez area, including William C.C. Claiborne, who would go on to become the governor of the territory of Orleans. Sibley moved to Natchitoches in March of 1803, where he began purchasing property. He was an avid letter writer and wrote to, among other people, Thomas Jefferson, who he provided with vocabularies of both the Caddo and the Natchitoches Indians. In October 1805, Sibley was named Indian agent for the territory of New Orleans, west of the Mississippi River. It appears that he used his house, which was located just south of the gates of the fort, as the agency, and he could serve in the function as Indian agent for most of the next 10 years. Sibley kept a journal in 1827 in which he recorded his activities as Indian agents. During this time, 25 different tribes and bands visited Natchitoches. These included the Caddo and related tribes, such as the Natchitoches, Nandarko, Nacogdoches, Hainai, longtime inhabitants of northwest Louisiana and eastern Texas. Tribes that had migrated into Louisiana during this time, as the Americans slowly pushed them out of Louisiana, and these included the Coshawta, Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Alabama, and Appalachia. The tribes to the west included the Wichita-affiliated tribes, such as the Wichita proper, the Tawakani, Kichai, Iskani, and then also two different bands of the Comanche. According to Sibley, he received all these visitors in a welcoming manner, giving them rations during their stay. For tribal dignitaries, Sibley hosted elaborate events in which the calumet or the peace pipe was smoked, and he distributed gifts to the various tribes. The gifts included everything from cloth, tobacco, and French handkerchiefs, which were a very popular item, but also guns and saddles, and to the major chiefs, regimental coats, United States flags, and gorgets with the eagle and United States of America engraved upon them. Sibley dealt with many different issues as Indian agent, but I would like to just share one of these with you today. This had to do with a white man, Samuel Watson, and a Coshada man named Tom. In January, Sibley learned of a confrontation or an argument between Samuel Watson, who was a recent transplant from Kentucky, and Tom, a Coshada man, at the salt works near Natchitoches. Tom approached Watson with a knife. Watson returned to the boat, which was loading salt, got a gun, and came back. And as Tom approached Watson, Watson shot him, killing him. Watson then went back to the boat and left. The sheriff was sent to try to locate Watson, but was unsuccessful. Sibley was very concerned. He worried that the Coshada would take vengeance by killing a white man for the death of Tom. He therefore contacted Tom's family, and in March, Tom's uncle and brother arrived at the agency. Sibley explained what had happened, the efforts that had been made to contact and arrest Watson, and asserted that Watson, when apprehended, would be brought to trial and if found guilty would be punished, and that our government would always afford them, the Coshada, protection, and we were ready to render them justice. We would punish an injury done to them as soon as to a white man. Sibley went on to say that he hoped the Coshada had sufficient confidence in the United States and that the Coshada would not take actions against any white man. The Coshada men replied that Tom might have been at fault. They believed the United States government was right, and they relied on government to do the right thing. Sibley gave the men rations, and then it went away, apparently satisfied. But in April, Pia Mingo and Red Shoes, two Coshada chiefs, with 33 men from the Sabine village of the Chalk, arrived in Natchitoches. At the meeting with Sibley, Red Shoe said Tom was his brother, and that he had come to demand and expect a satisfaction for Tom's death. Sibley explained what had been done. Watson had been caught, but had escaped, but when he was caught again, he would be brought to justice. Sibley thought Red Shoe was satisfied, but he returned shortly demanding gifts. Red Shoe claimed that the gifts would keep the Coshada from doing any mischief, and he couldn't think of losing his brother for nothing. Sibley wrote in his journal that I did not disguise from him that I was not well pleased at the manner in which he expressed himself, and we were not to be menaced into compliance with his unreasonable demands. But before the chief left, Sibley did give him a regimental coat, blue regimental coat, faced in red. In June, Whitemeat, a Choctaw, reported to Sibley that he believed that a Coshada man had killed a white man about 30 or 40 miles to the south. Sibley sent 2 men to investigate. They returned 3 days later saying that indeed they found a body of a man in the river, and they believed that he had laid there for about 20 days. Sibley formed a jury of inquiry with himself as coroner, and they left for the scene of the crime. When they arrived, Sibley impaneled a 6-person jury to examine the body. They found the body semi-submerged, the head was missing, the body was in a bad case of decay, and the fish had been feeding on the body. They were able to locate, however, what appeared to be 5 knife wounds in the side of the individual. Both Whitemeat and Tombolin, another Choctaw, gave testimony. Tombolin said that he had been to the Coshada village and that the young Coshada man had been bragging about how he had killed a white man after a hard fight. The Coshada man had been one of the ones that had come to Natchitoches with Red Shoe earlier, and at the time he had wanted to kill a white man, but the chiefs told him not to. He, however, stayed around in the area for about 2 days, hoping he could kill a soldier. Whitemeat said a white man had come by his home, leading a horse laden with trade goods. The description of the clothing that the man wore matched those of the man that had been found dead. Charles, Whitemeat's son-in-law, reported that he'd been returning from a trading trip to Natchitoches and came across a young Coshada man. They rode together for a while and eventually came across a white man leading a horse. The Coshada man wanted to kill the white man, but Charles said, "No, the path is clean, and this is our trading path, and we should not bloody it." The Coshada man and Charles rode on for a while, and then the Coshada man said he had to stop and he would catch up with Charles, which he never did. Whitemeat saw the man coming by his house the next day, leading with his head badly bruised and his hand bandaged. Sibley learned that the man's name was O'Neill, that he was a trader between taking goods from Opelousas to Natchitoches, and the jury ruled that the Coshada man from the village on the Sabine had killed O'Neill. Sibley sent William Rawlins to the Coshada village with a request for the chiefs to come to Natchitoches and bring the Coshada man who had killed O'Neill. Rawlins returned several days later with a message from the chiefs. They were fully sensible of our goodness toward them and were greatly distressed at what had happened, and they would never let go our hands or throw away our talks. But they had been sent for by Governor Cordero of San Antonio and had promised to go to see him. They did not know what for, but they would come to Natchitoches as soon as they returned from San Antonio. But they could not think of giving up the young man who had committed murder, a fact that they didn't pretend to deny. In June, Sibley heard that the Coshada were planning to abandon their village and cross the Sabine River into Spanish territory. He also learned that the Coshada had sent to the Appalachee and Pascagoula a belt and war talk, trying to convince them to join the Coshada in a war against the United States. He also learned that the Wichita and the Comanche had been to San Antonio, where they had been treated royally and showered with gifts. The Spanish were working hard to submit the tribes to the Spanish cause. And a little background here. The actual boundary between Spanish Louisiana and Spanish Texas and American Louisiana had not been resolved. When the French turned over Louisiana to the Americans, they did not identify where the real boundary was. And the Americans were saying that especially Thomas Jefferson, was claiming that the Louisiana Purchase extended all the way to the Rio Grande. The Spanish said it had not, that it was just extended east to a small stream just west of Natchitoches. And during colonial times, indeed, this stream, known as the Rio Hondo, which you can still see today, was the boundary between Spanish Texas and French Louisiana. So there was this disagreement over what the boundaries were. And the year before, the Spanish and the Americans had almost come to war over this particular fact. Both the Spanish and the Americans knew that the manpower represented by the tribes could be critical in any confrontation, and both were trying to get the alliance of the native tribes to work for them. The great Caddo chief, Deowood, undoubtedly at Sibley's request, arranged for the Grand Council to meet in Natchitoches. And he invited the Caddo, the Wichita, and the Comanche, all tribes from Spanish territory. Over 300 tribal members arrived in Natchitoches for this event. Sibley met individually with various tribal representatives, and on August 20, the Grand Council was held. Attending were members of the Comanche, Caddo, Tawakani, Darko, Nabadosh, Kichai, Hainai, and Aish. The parties assembled in the great council room. Sibley lit the ceremonial fire, and the attendants smoked the calumet. Sibley then delivered his message. Brothers, by arrangements with the French and Spanish, two nations beyond the great waters, we, the people of the United States, have become your neighbors, and all the great country known as Louisiana, as formerly claimed by France, is now belongs to us. The President of the United States, the great friend and father of all red men, assures you he is your friend and will continue to be so, as long as you are his friend and friends to the people of the United States. Sibley then addressed the relationship between the United States and Spain. We are not at war with Spain. We therefore do not wish or ask you to be less their friends than our own. The world is wide enough for all of us, and we ought all to live in it like brothers. He cautioned the tribes against opening your ears to bad talk of any people who may wish to make us enemies. But always be persuaded that we have not come to this country to do harm to any of our red brethren, but to do good. Sibley encouraged the tribes to return to Natchitoches to trade with Americans. And he had a few presents to give them in the name of your great father, the President of the United States, as a token of his goodwill toward you. And as you have found your way here, we hope that you return. Brother, these are the words that I have to say to you. When you return to your friends, tell them, we take them all by our hand, and repeat to them our words, and forget us not. Chiefs then rose to spoke. Their concerns were more pragmatic, mainly dealing with trade. The Tawakani chief stated that he supposed time will determine whether this day's talk will prove true. He was pleased with Sibley's statement and would carry them back to his people. But he had a complaint. He said, there is a man of your nation. He comes from Natchitoches, who is a trader among us. He is too dear with his goods. If he is one of your nation, can't you write him a letter and direct him not to impose so much upon us and make him sell his goods to us cheaper? Sibley replied that although he may be American by birth, if he was from Natchitoches, he should be considered a Spanish, and the Americans would have nothing to do with it. Next, the Comanche chief rose. He said he'd heard the Americans had come and he wanted to meet with them and was highly pleased that he had come. He said his people needed trade items and that the Comanche would gladly trade with the Americans. Deowood, the great Caddo chief, spoke last. He stated that he was happy to accompany the various tribes to Natchitoches and was pleased that they had been so well received. But he brought up the treaty that Sibley had negotiated between the Caddo and the Choctaws several years before. He declared that the Choctaw had broken the treaty when they killed and scalped two Nandarko women, and he was at the council to see if the conditions of the treaty would be honored. A little background here. The traditional home of the Choctaw was on the east side of the river in what is now Mississippi. But over the last umpteen years, they would travel into Louisiana for a winter hunt, and eventually there was a series of tribes or groups of them that would settle in Louisiana. So there was a number of different bands of the Choctaw in Louisiana, but the main group was still in Mississippi. The treaty between the Choctaw and the killing of the Nadarko women was not something Sibley would want to discuss in front of the gathered tribes. And he'd recently admitted to the Secretary of War that he did not believe the men who had killed the women would ever be apprehended and punished, but simply emphasized the importance of the treaty, explained what he had done. When the Choctaw on the west side of the river had learned about the murders, they had gone to the Caddo, telling them that they were very sorry, that they had nothing to do with it. Sibley had urged the Choctaw to go to the Choctaw on the east side of the river and see what they would say. But the Choctaw chief that was to go got sick, and the traveling conditions were not good. Sibley said that the Caddo should be patient a little longer, and added that the Choctaw consider the murderers vagabonds. Data would reply that he thought there had been enough time since the murders had been committed to have had something done about it, that he could readily believe that they were vagabonds, and that other nations punished us vagabonds instead of protecting them. David had learned that the leader of this group had recently been commissioned a chief by the United States Army over in Mississippi. And he went on to say that unless the Choctaw gave up the murderer to be punished, that the murder would be considered the act of the entire Choctaw Nation. However, he agreed to wait 3 moons longer or until cold weather, but if satisfaction was not then made, he would be answerable no longer. Discussion followed about sending the delegates to Washington, and then the tribal members returned home. Sibley would continue as Indian agent until 1815. To learn what happened to the Caddo and to Sibley when he was no longer Indian agent, you'll have to read the book. Now I understand we have a Q&A session.
Thank you. Yes. Our first question is from in the comment section, Brittany. Is this book specific to the city of Natchitoches, or does it cover the parish as a whole?
It actually covers the whole northwestern part of Louisiana at this time. The main settlement at this time was the Natchitoches area, but there was a number of farms and so forth, plantations by this time extending down what is Cane River, and the whole area was being developed. So it really concerns the area south of the Great Raft, which was a logjam on the Red River, all the way down to just not too far from Alexandria. So the whole northwestern Louisiana at the time.
Thank you. Our next question is about your research process. So you were the director of the School of Social Sciences at Northwestern State University in Natchitoches. And so obviously you have been physically in the area. Can you talk about how being physically present in Natchitoches helped or informed your research process, or just the way that you think about the project?
Well, I became interested in the project because I lived here. And we do have a good archives at the Cami Henry Research Archives at the university. When we do have people who have studied this area in the past, a number of theses and so forth. But it was really just interested in following all the different leads that came up, and surprised at what you can actually find about a period in this period of time. We have newspapers from the 1820s in Natchitoches. We have all kinds of colonial records. The courthouse has an amazing courthouse was never burned, unlike a lot of courthouses. So we have records all of it going back into the 1700s. There's a lot of primary data right here in this area. And it's just an incredibly complicated and intriguing area to study. It was fun. It's a hobby.
Thank you. Our next question is, during your research, can you talk about anything that surprised you or that you weren't expecting to come across?
Well, most of it surprised me, actually. I knew the basic background of settling the area, but the amount of detail was really all new. Sibley, who was Indian agent for about 10 years, um, It's not one that I think I would have spent much time with personally. He was something of a difficult character. He was not terribly popular in Natchitoches. Actually, he was always in litigation for one thing or the other. When he came and set up his home in an Indian agency, the Creole residents, the French Creole residents who had lived here before, accused him of actually building on their property. And that was a problem with all the Americans, actually. The land system in for French Louisiana and Spanish Louisiana was different than the American land system. And the early Americans that came here did not understand the system. So the fort and the trading post and the Indian agency actually were all built on land that was not public land, but actually belonged to people. And of course, the people who actually owned the land did not appreciate the Americans coming in and expropriating the property. So there are many things. Trip Sibley he was a tremendous letter writer. He wrote to everybody. A lot of those letters have been preserved, and you can get a real good feel of the area from his perspective, which might not be everybody's perspective, because he had a tendency to emphasize his importance in any particular event when he was writing. He was something of an egotist and was not well loved in the community. So that was surprising, I guess.
Thank you. Our next question is from Deborah in the chat. Question is the community of Gorham mentioned in the book?
I think Gorham actually is a sawmill community, isn't it? It's not mentioned in the book. I think it's one of the sawmill communities that really didn't get going until the late 1800s, early 1900s. But no, it's not mentioned in the book.
Thank you. Our next question is, have you moved on to other projects since the publication of this book? And are you planning on working on a new project? And if so, what would that be about?
Actually, I have a manuscript that I submitted to LSU Press and haven't heard back yet that looks at Natchitoches from 1840 all the way up to after the Civil War. That was a fun one. It looks at the various different types of people or different economies that the people in the area. It looks at the upland farmers and the what they call wood ranching. It looks at the planter families, and it looks at a whole cross section of the area. It also looks at um, Natchitoches during the Civil War, both problems faced by the people on the home front, and also Natchitoches actually was occupied by the Union Army in 1864, and about all the problems associated with both the Union Army passing through the area and also the Confederate Army. The area was just devastated. So yes, that manuscript has been completed and it has been submitted, and I'm waiting to hear. And then I'm working on another project with a gentleman who used to be state senator in Louisiana. We're working on his memoirs, which is also fun. So
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, that is our last question, so we can go ahead and say thank you and goodbye to the audience.
thank you very much. I appreciate your time and buy the book. Thank you.